The maglev doors slid shut with a pneumatic hiss, trapping two strangers between the 23rd and 52nd levels of New Austin's most exclusive orbital spire. She was elegant in nebula blue synthetic silk, her skin glowing under the soft amber ambient lighting. He was devastatingly handsome in a perfectly tailored charcoal flight tuxedo, violet eyes that seemed to see straight through her soul. 30 levels, 2 minutes. One look that ignites a reactor core neither can extinguish. By morning cycle, they'll believe it's over. By evening cycle, they'll discover some reactions never truly stabilize. They only wait for the right catalyst to consume everything in their path. The planetary gala at the stellar apex had been everything Elena Vance expected. Opulent, predictable, and utterly forgettable. She adjusted the holographic shimmer of her evening gown as she waited for the lift, her reflection caught in the polished obsidian walls of the 52nd level. At 28, Elena had mastered the art of navigating these glittering Martian social events, but tonight felt different. Tonight she was celebrating her acceptance into the most prestigious neuromarketing internship in the colony, a position that would launch her career beyond her wildest dreams. The soft chime of arriving doors interrupted her thoughts. She stepped forward, expecting to find herself alone for the descent, but instead found herself face to face with the most striking man she'd ever encountered. He was tall, easily 6'3", with perfectly styled silver-streaked hair and eyes the color of deep space. His black formal wear fit him like a second skin, suggesting a body sculpted by zero-G training and purpose. But it was something else entirely that made her breath catch. The way he looked at her, as if she were the only woman in the solar system, as if the stars had conspired to bring them together in this exact moment. Going down. His voice was deep, cultured, with just a hint of a lunar accent she couldn't place. 23rd level, she managed, stepping into the lift's intimate space. The doors closed with mechanical precision, sealing them in amber light and charged silence. "I'm Caspian," he said, pressing the sensor for the lobby. His fingers were long, elegant, with a simple databand watch that probably cost more than most people's shuttles. Elena. She found herself studying his profile as the numbers descended. 48, 47, 46. "That's a beautiful gown," he said, his eyes meeting hers in the mirrored walls. "Nebula blue. It makes your skin look luminous." Heat bloomed across her chest at the compliment. Elena was used to admiration. She had been told countless times that her beauty was striking, that her features were captivating. But this felt different. This felt like he was seeing her, really seeing her, not just her projection. "Thank you." Her voice was softer than she intended. "The gala was tedious," he supplied with a knowing smile. 3 hours of forced conversation about terraforming tax credits," she laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to please him. "You were there too?" "Briefly. I prefer more intimate settings." His eyes held hers steadily. "More authentic conversations." The lift slowed as they passed the 35th level, then jerked to a complete stop. The lights flickered once, then steadied, but the numbers remained frozen at 34. "Well," Caspian said, pressing several sensors without result, "it appears the station AI has other plans for us." Elena felt a flutter of panic mixed with something else entirely. Anticipation. "How long do you think we'll be stuck?" "Does it matter?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility. She studied his face, searching for any sign that this was a practiced routine, a wealthy magnate's elaborate pickup attempt. But his expression was sincere, almost vulnerable, as if he was as surprised by this moment as she was. "I'm supposed to start a new job on Monday," she found herself saying. "The most important opportunity of my career. And I'm supposed to be on a transport to Earth by tomorrow evening." he replied. "A summit that could change the trajectory of my corporation. But here we are." Here we are. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was electric, charged with the kind of tension that made her skin hyper-aware of every breath, every subtle movement. "Elena," he said her name like a transmission code. "I want you to know I don't usually do this." "Do what?" "Get trapped in lifts with beautiful strangers and contemplate throwing caution to the solar winds." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "And are you contemplating it?" Instead of answering immediately, he reached out and gently touched a lock of hair that had escaped from her elegant updo. His fingers were warm against her neck, and she felt herself lean into the contact. "For the past 20 minutes, I haven't been able to think about anything else." The admission hung between them like a challenge. Elena knew she should step back, maintain her professional composure, remember that she was a serious woman with serious career goals. Instead, she found herself moving closer. 20 minutes is a long time to be trapped with a stranger," she whispered. "Is that what we are? Strangers?" Their faces were inches apart now. She could smell his cologne. Expensive, subtle, with notes of ozone and something uniquely masculine. His hand moved from her hair to cup her face, thumb tracing the high curve of her cheekbone. "I feel like I've been waiting my entire life for this lift to break down," he murmured. When his lips met hers, the station disappeared. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid the moment might shatter. Then Elena's hands found the lapels of his jacket, and something wild and desperate took hold. His mouth was warm and skilled, moving against hers with increasing urgency. She could taste synthesized wine and promises, could feel the careful control he maintained, even as passion threatened to overwhelm them both. When his hands spanned her waist, drawing her closer, she forgot every rule she'd ever made about appropriate behavior. "Elena," he breathed against her lips, her name a question and a plea. "Yes," she answered, though she wasn't sure what she was agreeing to. The lift lurched back to life so suddenly they almost stumbled apart. The numbers began their descent once more. 33, 32, 31, counting down to the end of whatever this was. "My suite," Caspian said urgently. 2 levels up. Suite 5112. Elena looked into his eyes and saw her own desire reflected there mixed with something deeper, something that scared and thrilled her in equal measure. "This isn't like me," she said. "I know. It isn't like me either." The lift chimed softly as it reached the lobby. The doors began to slide open, revealing the bustling atrium beyond, reality, waiting to reclaim them. Caspian held out his hand. "One night, just one night to see what this is." Elena stared at his outstretched palm, knowing that taking it would change everything. She thought about her careful plans, her professional reputation, her rule about never mixing business with pleasure. Then she thought about the way he'd looked at her, as if she were precious and rare, and absolutely essential. She placed her hand in his. The lift doors closed once more as they pressed the button for the 51st level. This time Elena noticed neither of them was watching the numbers. 6 weeks later, Elena Vance stood in the obsidian lobby of Thorn Heavy Industries, her digital slate clutched in suddenly nervous hands. The spire rose 200 stories above New Austin's financial district, all carbon nanotubes and glass, reaching toward the rust-colored sky. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the colony spread out like a glittering circuit board. This was it. The culmination of 4 years of academy excellence, 2 years of specialized training, and countless sleepless nights perfecting her application. The Thorn Industries neuromarketing internship was legendary. Only one position offered each cycle to the most promising candidate on the planet. Ms. Vance, a poised woman in an immaculate silver tunic, approached her. "I'm Director Sato, Head of Human Resources. Welcome to Thorn Industries." "Thank you, Director Sato. I'm incredibly excited to be here." As they rode the lift to the 138th level, Elena tried not to think about lifts lately. Director Sato briefed her on the company structure. Thorn Industries was an interplanetary conglomerate with interests in terraforming, orbital real estate, and fusion energy. The CEO, she explained, was notoriously private, but universally respected. "Caspian Thorn built this company from nothing over the past 15 years, Sato said, as they walked through corridors lined with kinetic sculptures. "He's brilliant, demanding, and expects excellence from everyone around him. You'll likely have minimal direct contact with him, but when you do, be prepared." Elena nodded, though something about the name Caspian Thorn tugged at her memory. She dismissed the feeling as nerves as they approached the communications department. The morning passed in a whirlwind of introductions, orientation downloads, and an assignment that made her pulse quicken with professional excitement. She was to develop a crisis communication strategy for a hypothetical orbital merger, exactly the kind of high-level work she dreamed of. It was just past 13 when Director Sato reappeared at her holographic station. "Change of plans," she said with an apologetic smile. "Director Thorn wants to meet all new team members personally. Executive Strategy Room, 140th floor, 5 minutes." Elena's stomach fluttered as they rode the lift up. She'd prepared for this possibility, of course, rehearsing intelligent questions and polished responses. What she hadn't prepared for was the way her world tilted off its axis when the strategy room doors opened. He was standing with his back to them, silhouetted against the massive viewport that offered a breathtaking view of the Olympus Mons' distant horizon. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark gray flight suit that emphasized every perfect line of his frame. When he turned around, Elena's breath caught in her throat. Violet eyes, silver-streaked hair, the face that had haunted her dreams for 6 weeks. Caspian Thorn, the man who had whispered "just one night" against her skin as the twin moons set over New Austin, was the CEO of Thorn Industries. The man whose hands had mapped every curve of her body was her new boss. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice perfectly controlled, professionally distant. Only the slight tightening around his eyes revealed any recognition. "Welcome to Thorn Industries." Elena felt the blood drain from her face, then rush back in a wave of heat that climbed her neck. "Director Thorn, thank you for the opportunity." They shook hands, a brief formal contact that somehow burned more intensely than that first touch in the hotel lift. His fingers were exactly as she remembered them, long, elegant, impossibly warm. "I trust Director Sato has oriented you to our expectations." His tone was crisp, businesslike. No one observing would guess they'd shared anything more intimate than this handshake. "Yes, sir. I'm eager to contribute to the team." "Excellent." He moved to his seat at the head of the floating conference table, and Elena noticed the way he carried himself. Like a man accustomed to gravity-defying power, to having every word carry weight. "I understand you'll be working on crisis protocols, an important skill in today's interplanetary environment." The meeting proceeded with professional efficiency. Caspian, she couldn't think of him as Alexander here, discussed company values, performance expectations, and the competitive nature of the corporate world. He was articulate, commanding, and absolutely magnetic. Elena found herself hanging on every word while simultaneously fighting waves of memory. The way his voice had sounded at 03 Suaro, rough with sleep and satisfaction. The weight of his arm around her waist as she drifted off in his suite. The careful tenderness with which he'd traced the curve of her spine in the ambient light filtering through the view screen. "Ms. Vance?" His voice cut through her reverie. "I asked if you had any questions about the command structure." Heat flooded her cheeks. "No questions, Director Thorne. Everything is perfectly clear." His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary, and she saw something flicker in their violet depths. Desire, regret, warning. "Very good. Sato, if you could show Ms. Vance to her permanent workspace." "Of course. This way, Elena." As they filed out of the room, Elena felt his presence like a gravitational field behind her. At the door, she couldn't resist one glance back. He was standing at the viewport again, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the red planet. The line of his shoulders was tense, and she wondered if this was as difficult for him as it was for her. Her permanent station was in an open workspace, with a clear sightline to the executive offices on the floor above. Through transparent aluminum walls, she could occasionally see figures moving through the upper corridors, power brokers making decisions that affected millions of colonists. "One more thing," Sato said, as she prepared to leave Elena to settle in. "Director Thorne likes to review all new projects personally. You'll likely be presenting your crisis strategy to him directly once it's complete. I'd recommend treating that presentation as your real interview." Alone at her new desk, Elena stared at her blank holographic interface and tried to process what had just happened. 6 weeks ago, she'd spent the most passionate night of her life with a stranger named Caspian. They'd talked until the solar rise about dreams and fears and the spaces between words. They'd made love with an intensity that scared her, had whispered promises they both knew were temporary. When she'd left his suite that morning, they'd exchanged no contact codes, made no plans to meet again. It had been perfect in its completeness, a single night of connection that would remain untouched by the complications of real life. Except real life just became infinitely more complicated. Her interface chimed with a priority message. The sender ID made her pulse skip. "See Thorne Ind Mars. Ms. Vance, please see me in my office at 16 Nord to discuss your project parameters." CT Elena stared at the message, reading it 3 times before the words truly registered. Professional, distant, giving nothing away. But she knew that in 2 hours she'd be alone in a room with the man who'd seen her more vulnerable than anyone else ever had. She glanced up at the executive floor and saw a figure move past one of the glass walls. Even from this distance, even through layers of architectural barriers, she could feel the pull of connection, the same electric current that had sparked between them in a lift 6 weeks ago. This time there would be no escape when the doors opened. The next 3 weeks passed like a carefully choreographed dance between desire and denial. Elena threw herself into her work with the intensity of someone who had everything to prove, staying late into the evening cycle when the office floors grew quiet and the colony lights painted geometric patterns across polished surfaces. She was brilliant, and she knew it. Her crisis strategy was innovative, thorough, and exactly the kind of forward-thinking approach Thorne Industries needed. More importantly, it was a shield, something concrete and professional to focus on when Caspian Thorne's presence threatened to unravel her carefully maintained composure. Because he was always there, just at the edge of her peripheral vision, moving through the executive corridors like a force of nature, commanding attention without seeming to seek it. In meetings, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. When he spoke, rooms fell silent. When he smiled, which was rare and devastating, Elena had to remind herself to breathe. Their interactions were scrupulously professional. He reviewed her preliminary reports via the network, offered feedback through Sato, and maintained the perfect distance of a CEO who barely knew his intern's name. But sometimes when she presented updates in the main strategy hall, filled with senior executives, she caught him watching her with an intensity that had nothing to do with corporate communications. Those moments lasted mere seconds, but they burned through her professional veneer like a laser through ice. It was on a Tuesday evening, nearly 21, when the carefully maintained boundaries began to crack. Elena was alone on the 138th level, putting finishing touches on her final presentation. Tomorrow she would stand before Caspian Thorne and the executive board to present 6 weeks of meticulous work. Tomorrow would determine whether her internship became something permanent and extraordinary, or remained a brief, shining moment in her career trajectory. She didn't hear him approach. One moment she was absorbed in adjusting a holographic data visualization, and the next she became aware of a presence behind her. The air seemed to shift, charged with familiar electricity. "Working late again, Miss Vance." She turned slowly, her heart immediately accelerating. Caspian stood 3 feet away, his flight jacket discarded, magnetic collar loosened, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. He looked tired but magnificent, like a commander after a successful campaign. "Director Thorne, I didn't realize you were still in the Spire." "I could say the same about you. It's past 21, though." "I wanted to perfect the presentation for tomorrow. This opportunity means everything to me." Something flickered across his expression. Approval. Regret. "May I see what you've prepared?" Elena's mouth went dry. She'd imagined this moment countless times, but not like this. Not alone in the gathering darkness, with the colony spread out below them like a glittering promise. Not with him standing close enough that she could smell his cologne, the same expensive scent that had clung to the hotel bed sheets 6 weeks ago. Of course. She pulled up the presentation on her screen, hyper-aware of his proximity as he moved to look over her shoulder. For 10 minutes, they discussed market analysis and communication strategies. His questions were incisive, his suggestions elegant in their simplicity. Elena found herself relaxing into the familiar rhythm of intellectual collaboration, remembering why she'd been drawn to this field in the first place. "This is exceptional work," he said finally. "Sophisticated, practical, and exactly what we need moving forward." "Thank you, Director Thorne. That means—" Elena. Her name on his lips was soft, intimate, completely at odds with his corporate surroundings. "We can't keep pretending." She turned to face him fully, and the careful distance between them suddenly felt like a void. "Pretending what?" "That we don't remember, that we don't think about it every single day." The admission hung in the air between them, dangerous and electric. Elena felt her professional composure wavering. "I think about it," she whispered, "every single day." He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Do you regret it?" The question was barely audible, but it carried the weight of 6 weeks of careful distance, of professional masks, and denied longing. "Do you?" she countered. Instead of answering, he reached out and touched her face with the same gentle reverence she remembered from that night in the hotel. His thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone, and she felt herself leaning into the contact despite every rational thought screaming warnings. "I've tried to forget," he said. "I've tried to maintain appropriate boundaries, to treat you like any other intern. But Elena, you're not like anyone else. You're brilliant and beautiful and so far under my skin that I can barely think straight during board meetings." "Caspian," she breathed, and using his first name felt like crossing a line they couldn't uncross. "I know this is complicated. I know there are rules, protocols, power dynamics that make this impossible." "Yes, impossible." But even as they spoke the word, they moved closer together, drawn by the same magnetic pull that had ignited between them in a lift. His hand slid from her face to the nape of her neck, fingers tangling in the soft waves she'd worn loose today. If someone saw us, she started. The level is empty. Security drones make rounds every 2 hours. We have time. Time for what? To remember why we can't have this. His mouth was inches from hers now, and Elena could feel her resolve crumbling like oxidized iron. 6 weeks of professional distance, of careful boundaries and appropriate behavior, and all it took was his whispered name and the warmth of his hand against her skin. This is insane, she whispered. Completely insane. When their lips met, it was with the desperate intensity of 6 weeks of denial finally breaking free. Elena's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer as he backed her against the edge of her desk. The kiss was hungry, almost violent in its need, tasting of forbidden desire and dangerous possibility. His mouth moved to her neck, finding the sensitive spot just below her ear that made her gasp his name. Her fingers worked at the magnetic clasps of his shirt, needing to feel skin against skin to confirm that this was real and not another fevered dream. "Elena," he groaned against her throat. "We have to stop. If we don't stop now, I know—" But she didn't pull away. Instead, she tilted her head back, giving him better access to the curve of her neck, reveling in the way his control seemed to fracture with each passing second. The sharp chime of the lift arriving on their floor cut through the heated haze like a plasma blade. They sprang apart, Caspian immediately turning toward the viewports, while Elena smoothed her hair with trembling hands. "Director Thorne?" A security officer's voice echoed across the floor. "Everything all right up here? Monitors showed elevated bio readings." "Everything's fine, Officer Marcus," Caspian called back, his voice perfectly steady. "Ms. Vance was just finishing some project work. We'll be leaving shortly." "Yes, sir. Have a good evening cycle." The lift doors closed, leaving them in charged silence. Elena stared at Caspian's back, watching the subtle rise and fall of his shoulders as he fought for composure. When he finally turned around, his expression was carefully controlled, but his eyes burned with unfulfilled desire. "This can't happen again," he said quietly. "I know. The internship ends in 3 weeks. After that what?" He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw a war raging behind his violet eyes. Professional responsibility warred with personal desire. Corporate obligations battled against the memory of a perfect night that had promised so much more. "After that," he said finally, "we'll see." It wasn't a promise. It wasn't even a plan. But it was hope. And for now, hope was enough. The crisis hit Thorne Industries on a Thursday morning like a meteor strike. Sudden, devastating, and threatening to destroy everything Caspian Thorne had built over 15 years. Elena was in her office putting final touches on her internship presentation when Director Sato burst through the communications department with the kind of barely controlled panic that made seasoned executives reach for sedative patches. "Emergency protocol. Strategy room." "Now," Sato announced, "we have a breach." The strategy room filled quickly with senior staff, their faces ranging from concerned to grim. Elena found herself seated at the far end of the floating table, technically present, but clearly peripheral to whatever catastrophe was unfolding. She watched Caspian stride into the room with the controlled intensity of a commander preparing for battle. He was magnificent under pressure, she realized, while others fidgeted with slates or shuffled files nervously. He commanded the room with calm authority, his presence alone enough to settle some of the ambient anxiety. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying easily across the space. "As of 06:00 this morning, Thorne Industries is facing a coordinated attack designed to destroy our alliance with the Venusian Syndicate." The alliance. Elena knew it was worth nearly 800 million credits and would establish Thorne Industries as the solar leader in atmospheric processing. It was also Caspian's personal passion project. She'd heard him speak about it with the kind of intensity other men reserved for religion. Someone has leaked confidential atmospheric data to 3 major interplanetary news feeds, he continued. The data is authentic, but selectively edited to suggest we've been hiding significant toxicity levels and environmental violations. A murmur of shocked voices filled the room. Elena felt her stomach drop as she realized the magnitude of the crisis. This wasn't just corporate sabotage. It was character assassination on a planetary scale. The accusations are false, Caspian said firmly. But the damage to our reputation could be irreversible if we don't respond immediately and effectively, which is why I'm implementing an unprecedented crisis response strategy. His eyes found Elena across the table, and she felt her pulse accelerate. Ms. Vance has spent the past 6 weeks developing a comprehensive crisis communication framework. As of this moment, she's promoted to Acting Director of Crisis Protocols, reporting directly to me. The room went silent. Elena felt 20 pairs of eyes turn toward her, ranging from surprised to skeptical to outright hostile. She was 28 years old, technically still an intern, and suddenly responsible for saving an $800 million credit deal. "Sir," she said carefully, "I'm honored by your confidence, but nothing." His voice brooked no argument. "Your strategy is exactly what we need, and you have the clearest understanding of our response capabilities. The question is, are you ready?" Elena looked around the room at faces full of doubt and realized this was her moment, not just professionally, but personally. This was her chance to prove that she belonged in Caspian Thorne's world, not as a memory from a hotel room, but as an equal partner in building something extraordinary. "Yes, sir. I'm ready." What followed were the most intense 72 hours of Elena's life. She moved into a temporary command center on the executive floor, 3 doors down from Caspian's corner suite, coordinating responses across 12 orbital zones and managing communications with journalists, investors, and regulatory agencies. She barely slept, surviving on nutrient stims and determination. But she'd never felt more alive. This was what she was born to do, turning chaos into clarity, finding truth in the midst of deliberate confusion, building narratives that could change the course of billion-credit enterprises. Caspian was everywhere and nowhere, appearing at her shoulder with crucial information, then disappearing into back-to-back meetings with legal teams and government officials. When they worked together, they moved like pilots who'd flown together for years, anticipating each other's needs, building on each other's ideas with an intuition that bordered on telepathic. It was just past midnight on Saturday when the breakthrough came. "I found it," Elena announced, bursting into Caspian's office without chiming. "I found the source of the leak." He looked up from a stack of holographic documents, his face drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes immediately sharp with attention. "Show me." Elena spread her portable interface and 3 data folders across his desk, her excitement overriding any awareness of personal space. The leaked data all came from the same terminal in our Phobos office, but the access codes belong to an employee who's been on Earth for 2 weeks. Caspian leaned forward, studying her evidence with the focused intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Industrial espionage." "More personal than that." Elena pulled up a series of comms logs on her screen. "Julian Hart, the syndicate CEO's son. He's been feeding information to our competitors because he opposes the alliance. He wants his father's company to remain independent, even if it means financial ruin." My God. Caspian sat back in his chair, running a hand through his disheveled, silver-streaked hair. "A family civil war played out through corporate sabotage. The good news is we can prove it. The better news is we can use it." For the next hour, They crafted a response strategy that was part journalism, part psychology, and entirely brilliant. Rather than simply defending against the accusations, they would expose the real story, a tale of family betrayal and corporate manipulation that would shift public sympathy entirely in their favor. "This is incredible work, Elena," Caspian said as they finalized their press release. "You've saved the alliance. You've probably saved the company." The praise warmed her more than any professional accomplishment should have. "We saved it. This was a team effort." "No," he said quietly, his eyes holding hers across the desk. "You did this. Your strategy, your investigation, your brilliance. I just provided the resources." They were alone in his office, the building empty except for automated systems. The colony quieted beyond the massive viewports. The crisis was over. The alliance was safe. And suddenly Elena became aware that they were sitting closer than strictly professional, that his hand was resting mere inches from hers on the desk. "Elena," he said, her name a question and a prayer. I know what you're going to say about boundaries and appropriate behavior and corporate policies. Actually, I was going to say that you're extraordinary, that watching you work these past 3 days has been the most inspiring experience of my career, that I've never met anyone who could match my intensity and exceed my expectations at the same time. Her breath caught. Caspian. The internship is over. Officially, as of tomorrow, you no longer work for Thorn Industries. But the promotion was temporary, contingent on the crisis, which you've resolved brilliantly. He leaned forward, his eyes intense with something that had nothing to do with corporate communications. But I have an offer for you. A real offer? Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. What kind of offer? Partner with me. Not as an employee, but as an equal. Help me build the interplanetary expansion we've been planning. Create something unprecedented in the corporate world. Business partners? Among other things. The admission hung between them, loaded with possibility and promise. Elena stared into his violet eyes and saw her future reflected there. Not just professional success, but personal fulfillment beyond anything she'd imagined. And the other things, she whispered, would begin with dinner tomorrow night, somewhere with terrible acoustics and excellent vintage, somewhere we can remember what it felt like before we became CEO and intern. Caspian felt himself smiling for the first time in days. I remember perfectly. So do I. When he reached across the desk and took her hand, it felt like coming home and launching into hyperspace simultaneously, his fingers intertwined with hers, warm and strong and absolutely certain. One condition, she said. Anything. Equal partners means equal. I won't be your junior associate or your grateful protege. If we do this, we do it as equals in every sense. His smile was blinding. I wouldn't have it any other way. Outside the windows, the artificial dawn was beginning to touch the edges of the Martian skyline, painting the dome in shades of gold and promise. In a few hours, they would hold a press conference that would reshape the narrative around Thorn Industries. In a few days, they would sign contracts that would change both their professional trajectories forever. But for now, they simply sat in the quiet of his office, hands joined across a desk scattered with the debris of crisis and triumph, and remembered what it felt like to be just two people who'd found something extraordinary in the most unlikely place. 3 months later, Elena Vance stood at the windows of her corner office in Thorn Industries' newly expanded orbital headquarters, watching dust storms swirl across the plains of Mars like powdered rust. The title on her door read, Senior Partner, Interplanetary Strategy. Words that still made her pulse quicken with pride and disbelief. The alliance with the Venusian Syndicate had not only succeeded beyond their projections, but had catapulted Thorn Industries into the solar spotlight as an innovator in atmospheric technology. The story of their crisis management, Elena's crisis management, had been featured in Solar Business Review, Fortune, and the Orbital Journal. At 28, she was being called one of the most influential strategists of her generation. But it was the message waiting on her desk that made her heart skip entirely. Strategy Room, Azo 8. Ooh. Bring champagne. She glanced at her platinum chrono, a gift from Caspian for their 1-month business anniversary, and realized it was already 07:45. Their partnership had developed its own rhythm over the past 3 months, a dance of professional collaboration and personal connection that felt as natural as breathing. They were equals in every sense, as she demanded. He consulted her on major decisions, deferred to her expertise in strategy, and treated her insights with the respect accorded to senior partners with decades of experience. Their professional relationship was everything she'd dreamed of and more. Their personal relationship was complicated. They had dinner twice a week, always professional, always in public, always scrupulously appropriate. They traveled together for business summits, staying in separate suites, maintaining careful boundaries, even as the attraction between them hummed like a live fusion core. They were building something extraordinary together, but neither had been willing to risk it by acknowledging the desire that simmered beneath every interaction. Until tonight, apparently. Elena grabbed a bottle of sparkling nectar from her office cooler, kept there for celebrating client victories, and made her way to Strategy Room A. The space had been transformed since her crisis presentation. Now it served as their private war room, with walls covered in interplanetary expansion plans and market analyses that represented millions of credits in projected revenue. Caspian was standing at the viewports when she entered, silhouetted against the colony lights. He'd shed his formal jacket and tie, rolled up his sleeves, and she could see the tension in his shoulders that meant he'd been thinking hard about something. "Celebrating something specific?" she asked, setting the bottle on the conference table. "Several things, actually." He turned to face her, and the smile on his lips made her stomach flutter. "First, the Europa office exceeded its quarterly projections by 30%. Your strategy for the Jovian market was flawless." "Our strategy," she corrected automatically. "We developed it together." "Second," he continued, moving closer, "the Thorn Foundation received approval for its terraforming education program. We'll be funding academies in 12 colonies within the next 18 months. "That's wonderful news." Elena found herself smiling broadly. The foundation had been Caspian's personal passion project, and seeing it come to fruition meant everything to him. "And third," he said, now standing directly in front of her, "I received a very interesting transmission today." "Oh?" "From the director of Meridian Galactic. They want to offer us a partnership that would essentially make Thorn Industries the largest privately held terraforming company in the system." Elena's eyes widened. Meridian Galactic was legendary. Old money, older connections, and the kind of reputation that opened airlocks most companies couldn't even see. "Caspian, that's incredible. The opportunities for expansion alone would require us to relocate to the Titan colony for at least 2 years," he finished. "Establishing Saturnian headquarters, building relationships with the Council, creating entirely new market strategies." Titan. The word carried weight. Saturn's moon meant leaving Mars, leaving the familiar rhythms they'd established, venturing into territory that was both thrilling and terrifying. "Together," he said quietly, "as equal partners in every sense." The words hung between them, loaded with implication. Elena felt her heart start to race as she realized what he was really asking. "Caspian, I know we've been careful. I know we've maintained boundaries and kept things professional, but... Elena, I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend that what we have is just business." He stepped closer. close enough that she could smell his cologne, could see the gold flecks in his violet eyes. "What we have," she said carefully, "is the most successful professional partnership of my career. Is that all?" The question was barely a whisper, but it carried 3 months of careful distance, of denied attraction, of late-night strategy sessions that felt more like courtship than commerce. "No," she admitted, "it's not all." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone with the same reverence she remembered from that first night in the hotel, from that stolen moment in her office weeks ago. "I'm in love with you," he said simply. "Not just the brilliant strategist, not just the beautiful woman, but you. The person who stays up until 03 hours perfecting presentations, who argues with me about market analysis and makes me see solutions I never would have considered, who challenges me to be better than I ever thought possible." Elena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "Caspian, I know the risks. I know office relationships can destroy careers and complicate everything, but I also know that what we have is extraordinary, and I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been." She searched his face, looking for any sign of uncertainty, any hint that this was just passion speaking rather than genuine feeling. Instead, she saw the same steady determination that had built an empire, the same focused intensity that had attracted her from the first moment. "I'm in love with you too," she whispered. "I have been since that night in the lift. Maybe even before that. From the first moment you looked at me like I was something rare and precious." When he kissed her this time, it was different from their previous encounters. Less desperate, more certain. This wasn't stolen passion in empty offices or lift encounters that existed outside reality. This was 2 equal partners choosing each other with full knowledge of the consequences. "Titan," she murmured against his lips. "Titan," he confirmed. 2 years of building something unprecedented together. As partners. In business and everything else? Elena pulled back to look at him. This man who'd changed the trajectory of her entire life. 6 months ago, she'd been an academy graduate with dreams and determination. Now she was standing in a Martian boardroom, being offered the chance to help build a solar empire with the man she loved. "I have one condition," she said, echoing her words from months before. "Anything." "The champagne. We're definitely opening that champagne." His laugh was rich and warm, filling the strategy room with joy. As he moved to open the bottle, Elena walked to the viewports and looked out at the colony that had brought them together. Somewhere out there, other lifts were carrying strangers toward unexpected encounters. Somewhere, other people were discovering that the universe sometimes conspired to bring exactly the right people together at exactly the right moment. "To partnership," Caspian said, offering her a glass of golden nectar. "To more than one night," she countered, touching her glass to his. "To forever." As they drank, Elena realized that this was what she'd been searching for without even knowing it. Not just professional success or romantic fulfillment, but a true partnership that honored both her ambitions and her heart. Caspian had seen her as an equal from the beginning, had recognized her brilliance before she'd fully recognized it herself. "When do we leave for Titan?" she asked. "Next cycle. Unless you need more time to—" "I don't need more time. I've been ready for this my entire life." Outside the windows, dust continued to blow over New Austin, blanketing the dome in ruddy haze. But inside Strategy Room A, surrounded by the plans and dreams they'd built together, Elena Vance felt only warmth. The lift doors that had brought them together 6 months ago had been just the beginning. Everything else was just getting started,